Hello, welcome to the beginning of the third week of our sessions on management of field sales. Last week, we looked at the various steps in the sales process and how we manage at each stage in that sales process to keep our flow and control. And then we looked at the steps in the buying process. And during the last session, we also saw the sales process and the buying process side by side to understand that how they can be harmonized, how they can respond to each other. Now, we are getting into the next stage. That means the preparatory stage in the sales process has happened and the buying process has matured. And now we are in the actual sales encounter. We are face to face with the buyer. And so in the next two sessions, today's session and tomorrow's, I'm going to discuss this whole process of adaptive selling and adaptive presentation. By presentation, I mean the entire orchestration that happens before, during, and after in the face-to-face meeting with the intending buyer. So today's topic will be that how we are approaching the customer, what happens and what should happen. So the presentation strategy, therefore, is kind of a well orchestrated plan. It has some preparatory stages, it has some stages and processes during the encounter, and then something that should happen afterwards. Obviously, it should start with some objective, that what is exactly what we want to achieve in the sales presentation stage. Therefore, the pre-sale presentation plan happens by way of deep inquiry, by way of deep study and research about the customer's need, customer's problems, and so on, as we have already discussed. And we have to always remember that the customer is not looking for a product or service. The customer is actually looking for a resolution of a pain, solution to a problem. And that should guide all our presentation. So if you look at this strategic plan for the approach and our actions during the approach, side by side, as you see in this slide, then you will understand that how we are synchronizing the objectives and the process. Remember that the good first impression, everybody says that the first impression in a sales encounter is very, very important. The customer almost makes up his or her mind in the first encounter. Now, this first encounter is not exactly magic. It's not that it just happens as serendipity. It is actually most often a good encounter, first encounter, is the result of good pre-planning and prior research. So if you actually look at the left block, which shows the strategic plan for the approach, then you see there are four sort of stages there. Review the presentation objective, be clear about the consultative selling model, and review the 6-step presentation plan, prepare an approach worksheet. So as you see, it basically says that do prior research and do good rehearsal before you actually get into the encounter, which happens on the right block. Obviously, there should be some kind of prior appointment that can happen through a telephone or call, or that can happen through some kind of social referral. The social contact within the sales encounter is very important, because that kind of helps to build the rapport, helps to ease the person-to-person interaction, and lays some foundation for trust and relationship building. So the business contact during this time, converting the buyer's attention, can be guided through these steps that is shown there: agenda, product, the referral issues, customer benefit, question, survey, and combination. Now, this questioning, I will have a separate session on how to use strategically questions during the sales encounter. But today, as an introduction, you look at these issues, the objectives that should actually guide your sales call, establishing rapport, and obviously that will happen not by magic, as I said just now, but through prior research. You should be able to establish that rapport, including use of some social contact prior to the actual encounter. And the product demonstration, etc., or the response to questions and objections, all those things happen at a later stage. Don't get into that usually in the opening part of the encounter. A brief reference to team selling. These days, particularly in business to business and even for large consumer durable sale, we have a number of participants in the sales process. Just as from the sales side, often there may be 2 or 3 persons responding to the buyer's team, which may also consist of 2-3 persons. So it's actually a group process rather than an individual one-to-one process. The one-to-one process is there in the central characters in the drama, the key buyer and the key salesperson. But there will be other characters in this particular encounter that happens. There will be people from the sales side coming in with different kinds of expertise. So in a B2B, there will be some kind of a technical specialist in the sales team. There will be an account management person in the sales team. There will be some finance person sometimes in the sales team. And on the other side, there will be similarly people from the indenting side or the technical person. There will be some purchase person, some finance person. So it's actually, of course, it is very important that different characters, particularly on the sales side, they know each other's role clearly, and they don't sort of clash or contradict or go counter purpose in front of the customer. So these things actually have to be well rehearsed. Not that everything will go according to the rehearsed script, but at least some prior planning and some if-then analysis, that if the customer asks this, then who will be the person who will be responding, what will be the line of response. All these things should be based on this relationship strategy, product strategy, and overall presentation strategy. The 6-step presentation plan that I just now mentioned basically has these 6 steps: approach, need discovery, presentation, negotiation, close, servicing the sale. In a way, you can see that this is derived out of the sales process, I mean that we discussed earlier. So fundamentally, there is a preparatory stage, there is an actual presentation and negotiation stage, and there is an aftermath, the closing and subsequent after sales service and so on. These 6 steps will normally happen sequentially, but at the stage 3, at the stage 4, there may be some overlap. It can happen in somewhat simultaneously, maybe with a little offset in time. But then of course, in the closing stage, it becomes again a linear process, and the servicing of the sale, of course, is a very, very important point that we are again and again emphasizing in this particular sessions, that what happens after sales will often create the long-term relationship, and how you handle customers' queries and cry for help will actually create the bond. And so a customer who complains, a customer who contacts you with a problem after the sale is a very good candidate for a long-term relationship-based customer creation. So objectives of the approach are simple, that build rapport, you have to capture the person's attention and transition to the next stage of the sales process. These are the objectives, and there are some etiquettes to be followed during this approach stage. For example, in setting up the appointment, even that is actually an encounter. So do not ignore or delegate to a totally untrained person, or a person who really doesn't have the clue to what is happening in the sales process. But don't delegate it to a person who is not totally synchronized and well informed about your sales. So ideally speaking, the appointment should be, the telephone encounter should be made by the salesperson or his or her associate, well clued into the current stage and the current status of the sales process. Establish the objective of the call, the plan, and all of that. And obviously, you have to have the common sense of mutual adjustment for time. Do not intrude. Take the appointment where you can have quality time. If it is actually the sales process, there may be some other time which you are trying to break into for some initial door opening, but I am talking about the actual sales process. So here, getting an appointment where you will have good attention from the customer is very, very important. Even actually some customers use as a strategy, buying strategy, deliberately they have some chaotic environment created during the sales process. But as a salesperson, you should know that even there, if the person is orchestrating some kind of a, lot of objections and lot of different types of people asking different types of questions, even if that orchestrated sort of attack happens to the sales team, that also is actually, in a way, you are getting quality time, because the buyer's team might have prepared that how they are going to sort of destabilize your flow. And so you have to be therefore prepared for such customers or such encounters with some prior plan. Now, I was mentioning about some prior social contact, which actually warms up the call. It actually creates a opportunity for some kind of bonding. If it is a referral, then obviously it lays a good foundation for relationship building. And even if there are good referrals, your encounter should also start with a warm social process. So make comments which are general environmental issues related comments. It could be weather, it could be something that is happening in the city, it could be something that's happening in that particular industry, it could be related to the seasonal styles in case of B2C. All of these things should be made. There should be a definite, genuine interest in the buyer expressed through compliments, through not just random compliments, but well studied compliments go a long way to create some kind of a social rapport. And also social referrals are very interesting. Common known persons can create that bonding prospect. So in this social contact process, you should already be knowing that what are the topics of interest of the person. So cricket or some other game, golf, football, all of these can be good opening gambits. It could be in some cases, it's better to avoid direct topics in politics, but it is quite possible to discuss certain industry issues, certain issues relating to the economics, economic condition in the country, and so on. And the social contact actually should have some open-ended questions so that it can lead to some insight into the person's mind. So remember that, and also very carefully use your non-verbal communication skills in your body language as well as in observing and quickly analyzing in your mind the non-verbal clues coming from the customer's body language and selection of words and gestures and so on. The conversation should be, the flow in the conversation is definitely the seller's responsibility to keep the flow easy, warm, friendly. And even when the customer is maybe offensive or rude, there is absolutely obviously no point in responding to that situation with rudeness. You should have that control in your conversational skill to create an even keel, even if the initial part is little, aggressive from the customer side. And always keep the conversation focused on the customer, his or her industry, organization, their needs, their problems. And obviously, when you are talking about customers' problems or challenges in their industry, do it in a way which does not offend the person on the other side. And the approaches that you should have, this flow, as you see here: agenda, product demonstration approach, referral approach, customer benefit. I think I mentioned all of these already. So a good idea is end today's session with this couple of charts, is to create a sort of a game plan for the encounter using this kind of columns. That on one side you have, for example, the agenda. The agenda should obviously be based on the FAB principles that we discussed. That is, features should be presented through the discussions on advantages and benefits for the customer. not the other way around. That means not start with the bells and whistles of the product or the features in the product, and then say, okay, we have these features which will help you with this advantage and these benefits you will accrue. Rather than that, you discuss about the challenges faced by the customer in his or her requirement, and then look at the kind of advantages that should be aimed at, the benefits one should try to derive from the product or service that is under negotiation, and in that way you bring out the competitive features of your offering. So that's how actually you set the agenda, key points in the agenda, and highlighting again product as need fulfillment. So match the advantages and benefits with the features, the customer benefits, and then of course there's referrals and how you will use the referral, what referral you will use in the opening part, what referral you will use when objections are raised, what referral you will use at the later stage. All these referrals mean here something that you have already done, or some person who is a common acquaintance, or somebody who has expressed opinion about your goods or service. So it could be some testimonials, it could be some pictures of some installations elsewhere, it could be some story from the press about a particular installation elsewhere. These can be different kinds of referrals which can be used skillfully as the sales process progresses. Sometimes even telephone calls can be used skillfully while the sales process is going on. If you do have some customers strongly supporting your case for a new sale in another organization, and the customer may be willing to come to bat for you. So that can be used in some cases when the stake is very high. And with this kind of flow, remember all these chart making, preparation will not work if you actually suffer from some inhibition within yourself. If you remember, in the very first week we discussed that how important it is for a good salesperson to have self mastery. Self management is the beginning step in sales management. And so some of the things that inhibit a good call are fear of taking risks. So this different kinds of risk analysis, that if the customer asks you to reduce your price by 35%, what's the level of risk and how you are going to handle it? It is better to address those beforehand, anticipate those fear creating situations beforehand, and do that risk mitigation analysis so that you are not off balance during the sales process. Again, I mentioned all these are about self management, which is the first step for good sales management. Sometimes if you are a salesperson and you are very good at one-to-one interaction, and you kind of become nervous when you are making a public presentation or a group presentation, then don't hesitate to take help from one of your colleagues who may be more adept at group presentation. So understand your strengths and weaknesses and accordingly manage the flow. And fear of rejection is something that a salesperson lives with all the time, and there is no magic solution to it. You have to just manage it. It will be there. There will be objections. There will be sometimes rejection approaches used by the buyer as a strategy. You should know how to handle all of that. Okay, so these are some common sense general indicators. In the next session, I will take up a little bit more structural issues with respect to the sales call. Thank you.